one way or the other, the tendency of the mind is to settle on something. And at the same time, mind cannot settle, constantly in the buzz, constantly in motion. And yet it wants to settle on something. This is very well known dilemma that we constantly replace certain concept with yet another set of complex concepts. Perhaps sometimes justifying that the older concepts outlived, no longer serving us. Fine. We have a set of new ones there to serve us. If we hear that discourse clearly, the question may come to the surface. So, is there any work then? Is there any place left on the part of the one who is clearly here, clearly one and the same, no matter what are the extremes that set apart at the pole of the extremes, the infinite and the finite? Is there anything left to do? Or is this all there is, it takes, is to understand this? And this is a very important question. Because there is this, what that philosophy proposes. It contains an invitation, of course. That proposition contains an invitation. But if that invitation is accepted without understanding what this really pertains, then we settle for a concept of reality and may again bypass an opportunity that is present in this lifetime to bring this to cognition, to cognize it. Because if we had this clearly, then yes, what is there to do? Elusive thing that what defined by boundaries. Elusive thing that sense of individuality is defined by boundaries of identity. Individuality is very often spoken, in fact, at least when we speak from this perspective, from the perspective of these perennial traditions. Individuality, this personality, defined by the boundaries of identity. And these boundaries can be a personal confinement versus a decent side property and whatever you can imagine. One can live in a palace of these self-created boundaries. Therefore, it's not easy to have that sense of discrimination at all times, present at all times. And it is that sense of discrimination that is required from any or every sincere spiritual aspirant. Because without that discrimination, one simply settles on something. And if one settles on a set of ideas or ideology, then there will be easily propensity to remain in a status quo. Because somewhere in some mental department, maybe there was this aha moment. Temporarily things were more lit. Somehow there was this clearer idea that, wow, I never thought of that all there is this I, and M defines me, and whatever comes after really is just a matter of identification, and if I can just figure that out, then I'm unbounded. In principle, that is the case. but what is our day-to-day experience? That's what matters. So therefore, just by expounding on that perspective, expounding on that, let's call it a doctrine of what the ailments represent here, centrality of the I, where the definition of ego is an elusive category. We also are immediately in danger of bypassing and creating a possibility where we'll be exempt from any effort on our part. So this is why this addendum, so that we can have something else also to have in mind and to ponder on. One way or the other, when we speak of this idea of what it is, of what it means to be an individual, is a cultural phenomenon anyway. It is defined by a set of certain ideological confinements we could call a consensus reality. Once a certain consensus reality is shared, the notion of individual comes forth in a way how it is defined by that particular society, by that particular culture, by that particular civilization. Therefore, even when we come to acknowledgement and recognition of who are we in terms of our individual setup, we already are up against the culturally set mold. We already, as it were, measuring ourselves against what is out there, being perceived by ourselves, and in turn projected outward, because I don't want to say that that portion of the brain still active there, which mimics, and is this mimicking, this ape-like mimicking is very strong in us human beings. We like to feel special, and yet, with that sense of specialness, there is always a very strong sense of conformity. This sense of conformity, to conform to a certain set of ideology, how it manifests itself in the idea of what the individual represents. Conform, yes, conform, thank you. So this conformity is very much part of the puzzle where that mimicking is. So whether we like it or not, this is always in motion, as it were. It's always at work. And if any one of you have ever examined a life of extraordinary being in any way, in any degree, extraordinary being here means not just, let's say, in the world of spirituality. Anyone who was credited with some kind of breakthrough, whether we speak of Mahatma Gandhi or Lala of Kashmir, whether we speak of Albert Einstein or Charlie Chaplin, or whoever we can take as an example here, it's not just limited to the world of spiritual luminaries. We will find that these people had one shared trait, utter disdain and disregard for that what is meant to keep one firmly bound in this ideological perspective. There was this refusal to be molded into, but to such degree, it's not just becoming Sex Pistols or Alice Cooper. It's not about rebelling against, because rebelling against is part of. If any of you study the history of art, the whole movement of modernity had nothing to offer. It's an empty bubble because the whole modernity was built upon pushing against the boundaries of an established culture, which persisted longer and was formed into this monolithic understanding of what was considered to be good, valid, and proper. The avant-garde itself is known for pushing against the existing norms and canons of beauty, whether it's literature, music, arts, theater, and the list goes on as long as you would like to extend it. Marcel Duchamp's She is Hard, you know that work? It's simply drawing mustaches on the reproduction of Mona Lisa and naming it in French, She is Hard. Has no meaning whatsoever without the context of when it was created, where and how. And a lot of great avant-garde works of art are constant in their reference or referencing to what was considered to be a great established art. This analogy here is relevant to our gathering in as much as we are trying to get to the bottom of that, what the identity here represents. Because if we are to speak of what it takes to be a fully developed human being, then we should speak of having a being fully in possession of cosmic consciousness and not list. Nothing less would do. So in other words, already here is a very different set of where we want to aim. The idea that the human being somehow breaks through or having some ways to express themselves in life and spirituality comes as this appendix or some kind of an addition to help along the line of success story is a very, very, very naive New Age idea. Naive and also bankrupt at its essence. Because it fails to redress the most important thing. It keeps adding, bandaging, keeps adding to the existent bandwagon of all these applicational methodologies so as to keep intact the rotten idea of who individual being, healthy individual being can be considered to be. But healthy individual being in unhealthy culture is a phenomenon I've never heard of. So the whole thing needs to be turned upside down. We understand what it means to be a proper individual or full individual or fully developed individual, or simply speaking, a fully human being. That means someone who uses this God-given gift, the birthright, equipped with this marvel of the nervous system, which affords this being to experience itself as cosmic being. So the cosmic consciousness here is spoken of in terms of the basis of personality. So there is no other basis of personality we could speak of. Everything will essentially be a discombobulated idea that we try to adjust. And this is what the modern field of psychology is doing. It forgets to answer the very straightforward question, or maybe forgot even to ask that question, whether there is even a notion, or can we even trust the notion of that, what it means to be a healthy human being, a healthy, well-developed individual. What does that mean? What is this individual is like? These are the questions. And these questions are pertinent to how we are to work with that finite self, so that the infinite self shines through in all conditions and circumstances. So this is just that addition to the discourse on the infinite and finite and the centrality of the I in all experiencing. The Atman is Brahm. The Atman is, or the soul is the absolute. We can settle, we can cherish this understanding, we can cherish this idea. But where is our work? Where is the part that can assist to that process for it to be actualized? That's the question. And the question here can only come with this greater understanding that what we call individuality or personality is a cultural phenomenon, is a set of ideas that have been accepted and became something that we adhere to, we aspire to, and we have role models out there to aspire to. But we've no idea whether that person reached any heights of the inner development. Hence, the gap between the inner and the outer keeps growing. The ideas about success are so widespread that we then learn that our heroes are very often depressed people. Those whom we put our trust and projections, likes, are not even fully developed individuals when we speak in terms of what it truly represents. So this is a very important reminder, so that we don't discard again here this lofty concept and settle on that lofty concept and discard the possibility of where our work is still due, that there is still the inner and the outer. And the outer development can never ever replace the inner one. This is the other way around. It's like putting the cart before the horse. So just wanted to mention this. And just to add now to this, just like a small little appendix. And the development of the full potential here is inseparable from melting of these boundaries. And these boundaries are of two kinds. The outer, they're always, of course, very subtle, but they're the outer boundaries, the boundaries of, we could call them societal way of how things are. But we can kind of, in this postmodern age, we can find our ways, because there's so many niches, so many different levels and layers, and everything is kind of accepted. So one can be this, one can be that, one can find one's niche and coexist quite perfectly in all that. But what's more important here is this melting of the boundaries that are of internal dimension. And these boundaries of internal dimension are precisely this, what defines our personality, of how we think about ourselves, whom we consider ourselves to be. Because there is these two aspects. One is how we project ourselves outward and how we would like to be perceived. And yet there is also that part which is how are we being perceived by ourselves. That's where the truth lies. And in the age of digital revolution, it's the most perfect conditions for that alternative ego development. We develop it out there completely and build it up and invest into that. And it's very possible because there are apps for that. Why don't we even call them ego-propping apps? Like instead of having the Facebook, you just call it that. And that will be more honest and direct. A lot is invested here. We want to keep that and prop it up so that there is a very clear definition how we are being perceived. The thing is, from the perspective of this understanding that comes from age-tried, timeless wisdom, tested by time, wisdom traditions, this is of no consequences for our development. The way we are perceived is of no consequence. So in other words, it's a pure bubble. It's a pure bubble if there ever was one, in terms of how it reflects our inner development. Because we are never defined by the way others perceive us. We define others by the way we perceive them. I'm paraphrasing the words of His Holiness Maharishi Mahesh Yogi, who said, "We are never in terms of others, but others are always in terms of ourselves." The world is defined from within outwardly, not the other way around. It is how we are that we define the world. World out there cannot define us. It's simple impossibility. And this is where the true work really begins. The work of transcendence and the work of melting of these boundaries. And these boundaries also are of psychic conditioning in terms of what is they made of. If we speak of boundaries, there have to be something that acts as a boundary. If we create a wall, like there was a wall across the Europe, it's called Berlin Wall, it had to be a proper wall, not the wall you can hop over. It had to be a wall that defines the different social structures. On this side of the wall is one social structure, on the other side of the wall is another. So the wall had to be very tall, made of bricks. It's an extreme example, right? The fence may be defining the parameters of some territory. We want to say, well, this is mine, this is my garden. In the same way, the parameters which define our sense of identity are made of something. And they are made of that psychic repository. They are made of these vasanas, psychic impressions. So therefore, true spiritual work is impossible without melting down these boundaries, of melting down of these stresses, dissolving these stresses. That's another term for vasanas.